Everyone in that ballroom thought Maya Whitfield was my girlfriend. We were wearing matching burgundy, our hands kept finding each other without either of us deciding to, and not once did either of us correct a single person who congratulated us. My name is Jonah Pierce. I was 27 that spring, and I designed timber frame additions for a small architecture studio outside Denver. It's steady work. You draw a line, the line becomes a beam, the beam holds up someone's life for the next 50 years. I liked things that stayed put. Maya had never once in her life stayed put, which was probably why I'd loved her for 3 years and told no one, including her. Maya Whitfield was a pediatric nurse at Denver General, 26 years old, with a laugh you could hear from 2 rooms away and a habit of falling asleep mid-sentence on my couch after a 12-hour shift. We met in college, in a lecture hall, when she leaned over and asked to borrow a pen she never returned. 4 years later, I still had a drawer full of pens I bought specifically so she'd have something to steal. That was how it worked with us. She took things without asking. I let her. I never asked for anything back. The outfit request came on a Tuesday. Maya's cousin Devon was getting married that Saturday, and Maya had been asked to be a bridesmaid roughly 9 days before the wedding, which meant her dress arrived with 48 hours to spare and absolutely no plan for a date. "Wear the burgundy suit," she said, sitting cross-legged on my kitchen counter, eating cereal straight from the box, like she'd been doing since we were 20. "The one from your cousin's thing last year. You want me to match your bridesmaid dress. I want you to match me. There's a difference." She said it like it explained everything, and somehow, with Maya, it always did. Why? Because if I show up to a family wedding alone again, my Aunt Carol is going to spend the entire reception trying to set me up with a man named Chip who sells timeshares. I've met Chip. I've survived Chip once. I refuse to do it again. I should have asked why she didn't just tell people she wasn't looking. I should have asked why, out of every man she knew, she wanted the one who'd been quietly, hopelessly in love with her since a lecture hall in 2019. Instead I said, "Burgundy it is," and spent the next 4 days trying not to read too much into a color. Devon's wedding was outside Boulder, in a restored barn with string lights strung between the rafters and a mountain view that made every photograph look staged. Maya's dress was the same deep burgundy as my suit, and when she stepped out of her sister's car and saw me standing by the entrance, she stopped walking entirely. "Oh no," she said. "What? We match too well. This was supposed to be cute, not matrimonial. You picked the color. I didn't think you'd actually find the exact shade." She circled me once, inspecting the suit, like she was checking a patient's chart. "You look unfairly good in this." You say that, like it's a diagnosis. It might be. She looped her arm through mine before I could decide whether that sentence meant anything. "Come on. Aunt Carol's already scanning the room for me. We need to look extremely taken." I didn't know yet how literally she meant that. The trouble started during cocktail hour, when Devon's mother took one look at us in our matching burgundy and clasped both hands to her chest, like she'd witnessed something biblical. "You two coordinated," she said. "That is the sweetest thing I have ever seen." "We're not," I started. "Jonah's my +1, Maya said smoothly, cutting in before I could finish a sentence that would have ruined absolutely nothing and also, somehow, everything. We just happened to have good taste. Devon's mother did not appear to hear the correction, because she was already crossing the room to tell someone else. By the time we reached our assigned table, 3 separate relatives had called Maya's boyfriend handsome, and Maya had corrected exactly none of them. "You're not fixing that," I said, low enough that only she could hear. "It's a wedding. Everyone's emotionally compromised. Let them have their moment." Their moment is a factual error. Their moment is Aunt Carol crying into a shrimp cocktail because she thinks I've finally settled down. I'm not taking that away from her. Maya smiled at me over the rim of her wineglass, and something about the way she held that look a half-second too long made my chest do something complicated. Besides, would it kill you to play along for one night? I'd been playing along for 3 years. One more night didn't feel like the risk it should have. Dinner went the way weddings go when you're seated beside your best friend and dressed like the two of you planned a life together. She stole rolls off my plate. I refilled her water before she noticed it was empty. At one point, her cousin's 6-year-old climbed into her lap uninvited and fell asleep against her shoulder, and Maya looked across the table at me with an expression I couldn't read, soft and a little startled, like she'd surprised herself with something. "You're staring," she said later, once the kid had been reclaimed by his mother. "You're memorable." That's a very diplomatic way to avoid the word I think you actually meant. What word did I mean? Maya didn't answer. She reached over and straightened my tie instead, an unnecessary adjustment that required her to lean close enough that I could smell her perfume over the candles on the table, something warm with vanilla underneath it. Her fingers stayed at the knot a beat longer than the task required. "There," she said quietly. "Now you look like a man who's taken. By you. Obviously by me." She said it like a joke. Her eyes didn't look like they were joking. The band started up around 9, playing the kind of slow song that exists specifically to embarrass single people at weddings, and Devon and her new husband took the floor for their first dance. Halfway through, the DJ invited other couples to join, and half the reception drifted onto the hardwood in twos. Maya held out her hand to me. "Come on. We're not a couple, Maya. We're wearing matching burgundy at a wedding where 40 people already think we're engaged. I think the ship has sailed, Jonah. Might as well enjoy the cruise." I took her hand. I'd danced with Maya before, at other people's weddings, at friends' birthdays, drunk and laughing in kitchens after too much wine. This felt different. She fit against me the way she always had, one hand at my shoulder, but this time neither of us made a joke to cut the tension, and the tension didn't leave. Her cheek was close enough to mine that I could feel her breath change when the song slowed. "Everyone keeps congratulating us," she said, quiet, not quite looking at me. I noticed. "Does it bother you?" I thought about lying. I'd spent 3 years lying, mostly by omission, mostly by simply never saying the thing that lived permanently in my chest. But her hand was warm in mine, and the string lights were doing something unfair to her face, and I was tired, suddenly, of being careful. "No," I said. "It doesn't bother me at all." Maya went still. "Jonah, you asked." I did. She pulled back just enough to look at me properly. Whatever she found in my expression made her breath catch. I felt it against my collar. "Why doesn't it bother you?" There it was, the question I'd avoided for 3 years, standing right in front of me in a rented barn under borrowed lights. And for once, I didn't have anywhere left to hide it. "Because I've been in love with you since a lecture hall you don't even remember," I said. "Since before the pen, since before any of this. I've just never had a reason good enough to say it out loud." The band kept playing. Nobody around us noticed that the ground had shifted under 2 people standing perfectly still in the middle of the dance floor. "You've loved me for 3 years," Maya repeated, like she needed to hear the shape of the words to believe them. "Give or take. And you never said anything. You were my best friend. I didn't want to gamble that for a feeling you might not have back." Maya's eyes were bright now, and her hand tightened in mine. "Jonah, I asked you to wear matching burgundy to my cousin's wedding. I know. I have owned this dress for 6 days. I have thought about almost nothing except what color your suit was going to be." She laughed, short and disbelieving, wiping quickly at one eye. "I have been in love with you since somewhere around junior year, and I have spent every single day since then convincing myself it was easier not to say anything, because you were the best friend I had, and I didn't want to lose that over a feeling I couldn't prove you had back." I stared at her. 3 years of careful distance collapsed in one sentence. "You color-coded a wedding outfit," I said slowly, as a declaration of love. It was subtle. It was not subtle. Aunt Carol proposed for us. I let her, didn't I? I laughed, and something in my chest that had been braced for years finally let go. I lifted a hand to her face, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. She rose onto her toes instead and kissed me, right there on the dance floor, in front of a wedding full of people who had already decided, days before we had, that we belonged together. When we separated, her forehead rested against mine. "That's going to make the wedding photos extremely confusing," she whispered. "Devon's photographer already has 40 pictures of us holding hands." "Good. I want proof this happened, in case I decide tomorrow it was the champagne." "Was it the champagne?" "No." She kissed me again, soft and certain. "It was never the champagne." We stayed on that dance floor, through 2 more songs, ignoring the pointed looks from Maya's mother, who had apparently known something the rest of us hadn't for quite some time. When we finally sat back down, Aunt Carol appeared at the table, holding a glass of champagne and looking entirely too pleased with herself. "I knew it," she announced. "I have known it since the 2 of you walked in matching. When's the wedding?" "Aunt Carol," Maya said, laughing, "we've been together for 10 minutes. "Well," Aunt Carol said, unbothered, "you've clearly been in love for a lot longer than that. I've got eyes." She patted my shoulder on her way past. "Welcome to the family, sweetheart. Chip's very disappointed, by the way." "Chip will recover," Maya called after her. Part 2. The morning after the wedding, I woke up on my own couch, still half in my burgundy suit, with a text from Maya that read only, "Tell me last night was real and not a very specific dream." I called her, instead of texting back. She picked up on the first ring. "It was real," I said. "You color-coded a proposal." "It was not a—" She stopped. "Okay, it was a little bit a proposal." I panicked. "I've had feelings for 3 years and a 9-day notice period for a wedding, and I made questionable decisions under pressure." "Best questionable decision you've ever made." "Debatable. I once adopted a cat during a thunderstorm." "That cat is still alive and thriving, Maya." "He is. He's also currently sitting on my chest, judging me for smiling at my phone." A pause. Softer. "Are we doing this? For real? Not just wedding-adjacent feelings that fade by Monday." I thought about 3 years of careful distance, of pens I bought so she'd have something to steal, of every night she fell asleep on my couch, and I sat very still so I wouldn't wake her. "Maya, I've had feelings that outlasted 2 jobs, 1 apartment move, and your entire brief obsession with sourdough starter. This isn't fading by Monday." She laughed, and I heard something in her voice loosen. "Come over. I want to see you when I'm not wearing a bridesmaid dress and 40 pounds of hairspray." I drove to her apartment with the burgundy suit jacket still slung over the passenger seat, feeling 22 years old again, feeling like the ground had finally caught up to where my chest had been living for 3 years. Maya opened the door in sweatpants and one of my old college hoodies, one I hadn't seen in 2 years and had assumed was lost forever. "That's my hoodie. It's my hoodie now. Possession is 9/10 of the law." She pulled me inside by the front of my shirt, the same instinct that had guided her hand to my tie the night before. "I've been thinking." Dangerous. "I've been thinking that I don't want to do the slow part, the careful 3 dates before you hold hands part. We've already had 3 years of careful. I'd like to skip straight to the part where you're mine, and everyone already knows it, because frankly, my whole family found out before I did." That's not exactly how relationships typically start. We're not a typical couple. We're the couple that got engaged by outfit coordination before we'd even kissed. She looked up at me, some of her bravado slipping into something more vulnerable. "Is that too fast for you?" I thought about the years I'd spent being careful, weighing every word, protecting a friendship I was terrified to lose. Careful had cost me 3 years. I was done being careful. "No," I said. "It's not too fast at all." I kissed her then, in her doorway, with her cat weaving unbothered between our ankles, and it felt less like a beginning and more like arriving somewhere I'd been circling for a very long time. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. They were ordinary in a way that felt like the biggest gift either of us had ever been given. Maya came over after 12-hour shifts and fell asleep on my couch, except now I didn't have to sit still and pretend I wasn't holding my breath. I just wrapped an arm around her and let her sleep. I left drafting pens on her kitchen counter and she stole them the way she always had, except now she kissed me before she took them, like the theft required a toll. We told our friends within the week. Nobody was surprised. Devon, still glowing from her own wedding, informed us she'd bet her husband $50 we'd be official by the reception's end, and she'd technically lost by about 40 minutes. "I want everyone to know," Maya said one night, 3 weeks in, curled against my side on my couch, "that I take full credit for engineering this. The matching burgundy was a masterstroke. You didn't engineer anything. You panicked and picked a color. I panicked strategically. There's a difference. Is there?" "There absolutely is." She tilted her face up to mine. "Would you have ever said anything if I hadn't asked you to match me?" I considered lying, telling her some version where I was braver than I actually was. But we'd stopped lying to each other the night we started, and I didn't intend to bring the habit back now. "Probably not," I admitted. "I'd convinced myself the friendship was worth more than the risk. I would have loved you quietly for another 10 years and called it contentment." Maya's expression softened into something almost sad. "I'm glad I panicked then." "Me too." Part 3. 6 months in, Maya's hospital offered her a promotion, charge nurse on the pediatric floor, a title she'd wanted since nursing school. It also came with the option to transfer to their newer facility in Colorado Springs, an hour and a half away, better pay, better hours, a fresh unit she'd get to help build from the ground up. She told me about it over dinner, turning her fork over and over without eating. "That's incredible, Maya." "It is." She still wasn't looking at me. "It's also an hour and a half from you. People do long distance for less exciting reasons than a 150-mile promotion. I don't want to do long distance 6 months into a relationship we started at my cousin's wedding. So don't take it." The words came out faster than I meant them to, and I heard how they landed the second they left my mouth, sensible and hollow, and exactly the kind of careful I'd promised her I was done with. Maya set her fork down. "Don't take it. Jonah, this is the job I've wanted since I was 22. "I know. Then why would you tell me to give it up?" "Because I panicked," I admitted, echoing her own words back at her. "Because we've had 6 months, and I don't know how to compete with a job you've wanted your whole career, and my first instinct was to protect what we have, instead of trusting it could survive an hour and a half of highway." Something in Maya's face eased, though she still looked wary. "That's a very honest answer. I'm trying something new. It's called not lying to the person I love. How's it working out?" "Terribly. I still want to ask you to stay. But..." I reached across the table and took her hand. "But I'm not going to, because I watched you talk about this floor for 20 minutes with more excitement in your voice than I've heard in months, and I refuse to be the reason you don't get to have that." Maya's eyes went bright. "You'd really do the drive." "I designed a building with a client base in 3 counties, Maya. I can do an hour and a half for you. It's not always going to be easy. Neither was falling in love with my best friend for 3 years without saying anything. I think we've proven we're capable of hard things." She laughed, wet and unsteady, and came around the table to sit in my lap, arms looped around my neck. "I love you," she said, like it still surprised her a little every time she said it out loud. "I love you, and I'm taking the job, and I'm going to make you drive to Colorado Springs, so often you'll need a second toothbrush there. I already keep one in my car. I've been optimistic. You've been planning." "Same thing. With you." Maya took the promotion. For the next 4 months, I learned the exact traffic patterns of I-25 South, and she learned to leave her porch light on for the nights I arrived after 10. We fought exactly once, over a missed dinner and a cancelled weekend, and made up within the hour because neither of us wanted to spend a single night we didn't have to, being angry instead of together. When her unit stabilized, she requested a transfer back to Denver, not because the distance had broken us, but because, in her words, she'd proven to herself she could build something on her own, and now she wanted to build the next thing with me, in the same city, at the same table. A year to the day after Devon's wedding, I asked Maya to be my date to a much smaller occasion, dinner at the same barn venue, rented quietly for one evening, String lights hung the way they had been the night everything started. She arrived in Burgundy without my asking, because of course she did. "You're doing this on purpose," she said, looking around at the familiar rafters. "I'm doing this on purpose." I got down on one knee before she'd finished taking in the room, and Maya's hand flew to her mouth exactly the way Aunt Carol's had a year earlier, except this time there was no wedding to distract from it, no cousin's vows to hide behind, just the two of us, and a color we'd chosen for each other twice now. "Maya Whitfield," I said, "you asked me to match you for one wedding. I'd like to ask you to match me for the rest of them. Every wedding, every ordinary Tuesday, every 12-hour shift, you fall asleep in the middle of a sentence. Marry me." She was already nodding before I finished, tears slipping down as she pulled me up by the front of my shirt, the same way she had that very first night in her doorway. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes. Aunt Carol will never let either of us hear the end of it." Aunt Carol saw it coming before we did. Aunt Carol sees everything coming. It's genuinely a little frightening. We married the following spring, in that same barn, under those same lights, and yes, in Burgundy, because by then it wasn't a color anymore, it was ours. Devon gave a toast about a wedding-crashing outfit that had accidentally started a marriage, and Aunt Carol cried into her champagne and told anyone who'd listen that she'd known it since the moment we walked in matching. 3 years later, we still keep matching outfits for anniversaries, not because we need the excuse anymore, but because some traditions are worth keeping exactly because of how they started. Two people who loved each other quietly for years, standing in a rented barn in the same shade of red, finally done pretending it meant nothing. What would you have done if your best friend asked you to wear a matching outfit and the whole room assumed you were already a couple? Have you ever had a moment like that, where everyone else saw it before you did? Tell me your story in the comments, and for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter, exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.